At its peak, Arthur Treacher had 826 restaurants, from New York to Ohio to Illinois. Today there are 4. All in Northeast Ohio, all within about 30 miles of each other. So how does a chain that size just quietly vanish from the American map? And how is the food people remember from 1974 still drawing a line out the door in 2026? That is the whole story, and it starts with the food, because the food is the reason any of this matters. The full order was a thing. 2 pieces of fish, a pile of those thick chips, 2 hush puppies, a little cup of coleslaw that was creamy and just sweet enough that you ate the whole thing, even though you told yourself you were only there for the fish, and tartar sauce in that plastic cup with the peel-off lid. Carry the tray to a booth, and you had a meal that cost less than $5 and smelled like the best Friday night of your life. Walk into one of those restaurants in the 70s, and the fish arrived in wide, almost pie-shaped fillets fried a deep golden brown. The crust was light enough to puff away from the fish in places, but strong enough to stay crisp under malt vinegar. People have been chasing that recipe for 50 years. The best copycat versions all point to the same trick, something closer to a pancake mix cut with club soda instead of plain flour and water. The carbonation made the crust puff up lighter and crispier than any standard beer batter could manage. If you wanted to try it at home, that is genuinely where you would start. Pancake mix, club soda. A pinch of salt, a little garlic powder, and oil hot enough that a drop of batter sizzles the second it hits the surface. Use cod if you can find it, cut thick, and do not overcrowd the fryer. That is as close as you are going to get without driving to Ohio, and malt vinegar was part of the experience. Today, that does not sound unusual, but imagine a bottle of it sitting on a fast food counter in suburban Ohio in 1974. A lot of American customers had never put malt vinegar on anything in their lives. The chain introduced an entire generation to the idea that fried food could be made even better by pouring vinegar all over it, and honestly, some of us never came back from that. Then there were the hush puppies, small cornmeal fritters, savory, oniony, slightly sweet, and crunchy enough that even people who claimed they hated hush puppies remembered these. A woman on a review site who says she hates hush puppies drove to the last remaining location, tried them out of obligation, and wrote that they were slightly sweet, wonderfully crunchy, and delicious. That is a hush puppy with something to prove. There were crunch pups, which were hot dogs dipped in batter and fried, and I know how that sounds. But there is a guy who used to go to the one on Queens Boulevard in Forest Hills with his grandmother every week. She ordered fish and chips, he ordered a crunch pup and chips. Every week. Same restaurant, same grandmother, same order. That is when a menu item stops being food and turns into a calendar for somebody's childhood. And there was the lemon love, a fried hand pie with a lemon filling that people still get emotional about decades later. One food blogger who visited the surviving location called it their new favorite fast food pie and said the filling was lemony and creamy and better than it had any right to be. You cannot bring up these restaurants anywhere on the internet without somebody showing up to say they would trade something important for one more lemon pie. The restaurants had their own feel. Red and white baskets, steam escaping when the fish broke open, the vinegar bottle on the table, the smell of the fryer hanging over the parking lot before you even reached the door. The chips were not French fries. They were thick cut, ridged, English style, heavy enough to hold their shape when you dragged one through a puddle of malt vinegar. Another reviewer described walking in and finding it looked almost exactly the way it did when they first walked in back in 1972. Same layout, same feel, old movies connected to the restaurant's history playing on the screen, photos of the real Arthur Treacher on the walls. During Lent, that smell could produce a line. Ben Vittoria, the man who eventually operated the final freestanding location, remembered people waiting outside before opening on Ash Wednesday, not wandering in after they saw the sign, lined up and waiting for fried fish in an Ohio winter. And here is the detail to hold on to because it becomes important later. The people preserving the brand today say they are still using the original recipes, seasonings, and specifications. Nearly everything surrounding those recipes has changed: owners, suppliers, headquarters. The company went bankrupt and came back and shrank again and passed through more corporate hands than I can count. But in Northeast Ohio, the old way of making the food survived. And the story of how that food was nearly destroyed starts with a question nobody expected to matter. Where did the recipe come from in the first place? Columbus, Ohio, 1969. Three men came together around a simple idea: bring proper British fish and chips to American fast food. Not a frozen fish stick, not a breaded square on a bun. Fish and chips served as the main event. The founding group included real estate developer Robert Davis and Dave Thomas. Yes, that Dave Thomas. Before Wendy's, Thomas had helped turn around 4 struggling Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Columbus. He understood small menus, consistent prep, and a line that moved quickly. But he did not stay. By November of 1969, Thomas left and opened the first Wendy's in the same city. 2 restaurant ideas taking shape in Columbus at almost the same moment. One became an international hamburger empire. The other grew to more than 800 locations and nearly disappeared. The first cluster of locations opened in central Ohio that same year, including one on Morse Road in Columbus that is now a pawn shop. If you drove past it today, you would have no idea what used to be there. But for a few years in the early 70s, that stretch of road smelled like hot oil and vinegar every Friday afternoon. But the fish chain had something Wendy's did not. It could claim a connection to the beginning of fish and chips itself. In Bow, rhymes with now, East London. The Mallon family operated a shop dating to the 1860s, widely described as the first recorded fish and chip shop in England. The company obtained exclusive rights to the Mallon recipe and methods, not inspired by, not based on, the actual original. That became the batter, the frying method, the way the chips were cut. That decision gave the chain its greatest advantage, and as it turned out, its greatest vulnerability. Because once you tell customers that your food is the original, you cannot quietly make it less original without breaking the promise. For the name, the founders found Arthur Treacher, a British character actor born in Brighton in 1894. He played Jeeves, he appeared in Shirley Temple films, he was Constable Jones in Mary Poppins. By the late 60s, most Americans knew him as Merv Griffin's announcer. He was not the restaurant's founder, he was its spokesman, and the deal reportedly came together through Bob Hope. But he committed to the role. At promotional appearances, Treacher arrived aboard a red London double-decker bus. A 70-something British actor stepping off a bus in an American strip mall parking lot to open a fast food fish restaurant with his own face on the sign. It was ridiculous, it was theatrical, and it worked. There was a jingle, and if you heard it once, you heard it 1,000 times. Clap your hands and smack your lips for Arthur Treacher's original fish and chips. There were collectible cups, Cleveland baseball promotions, Flintstones cups for the kids, a Godfather parody commercial. They were not merely selling fried fish. They were selling a small piece of Britain that could fit between a supermarket and a shoe store. Treacher himself died in December of 1975 before the company reached its greatest size. His face stayed on the sign, the double-decker bus disappeared. And eventually fewer and fewer of the people controlling the brand had any connection to Arthur Treacher England, or the original idea. If this is bringing back your version of that restaurant, the sign, the vinegar bottle, the order your family always got, hit subscribe. Every week I dig up another name that used to be everywhere and find out where it went. Because this is the point where the chain reaches the top, and it is also the point where the floor beneath it is quietly being removed. By the early 1970s, the parent company had become something called Orange Co. That sounds like the name of a citrus company because that is exactly what it was, a Florida citrus operation that had wandered into fast food fish. Under Orange Co., expansion accelerated. The restaurants began appearing in strip malls, shopping centers, and food courts across the country. You could smell one before you saw the sign. On Friday nights, the line might stretch right out into the mall corridor, and customers brought friends because it still felt like something they had discovered, not a chain. Some of you reading this right now are remembering a specific mall and a specific Arthur Treacher's in it. The one next to the Sears, or down the corridor past the fountain, or in the food court where you could watch the fish come out of the fryer from 3 stores away because the smell carried that far. But Orange Co. did not have the cash to build all these locations outright, so they relied on sale-leaseback agreements. Build a new restaurant, sell the property to an investor for cash. Lease the building back and operate inside it, then use the money to do it again. As long as every restaurant keeps producing money, the machine works. But the leases stayed on the books even when a restaurant failed. Close the store, the rent still exists. Stop selling fish entirely, the rent still exists. By 1979, the chain had reached 826 restaurants, and those old lease arrangements had created approximately $61 million in contingent liabilities. That debt was invisible from the outside, but it meant the company could expand and could never retreat, and that would have been a manageable problem if the food had stayed the same. It did not. In November of 1975, Iceland expanded its exclusive fishing zone to 200 nautical miles. Britain objected, and the resulting dispute became known as the Third Cod War. Despite the almost comic name, it was a real confrontation between two NATO countries, Icelandic Coast Guard vessels cutting British fishing nets, ships ramming one another, until an agreement was reached in 1976. The chain did not have ships in the North Atlantic, but the consequences reached every one of its friars. They had built their product around Icelandic cod, and when access tightened, prices reportedly doubled. That was a serious problem, but not a fatal one. The brand was strong, the customers were loyal, and the recipe still tasted the way people expected. What made it fatal was one decision. On November 21, 1979, Orange Co. sold the chain to Mrs. Paul's, the frozen seafood company. Mrs. Paul's inherited expensive cod on one side and $61 million in lease obligations on the other, and they made the call. They pulled the Icelandic cod and replaced it with Pollock. And that single decision is where everything broke. Not just the fish. Everything. The crust interacted with Pollock differently. The texture was oilier. It sat on the fillet wrong. Customers took one bite, looked across the table, and asked, "Did they change something?" They changed something. Online, decades later, people still talk about the exact moment they noticed. One person remembered ordering the usual 2-piece on a Friday and sitting in the car thinking something was off before they even made it home. Another said the fish used to be firm and the crust used to hold, and after the switch it was softer and greasier and just not the same meal anymore. And the moment customers started doubting the food, the franchisees, who had already been frustrated by years of declining corporate support, stopped cooperating entirely. Some withheld royalty payments, eventually totaling roughly $5 million. Lawsuits followed, reaching the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Money that could have gone to fixing restaurants and rebuilding the menu was now going to lawyers, and without that revenue, the lease trap became unsurvivable. The company could not close underperforming locations because the rent still had to be paid on empty buildings. Every restaurant that lost customers after the fish switch was now bleeding money the company could not stop. And the meaning of the name collapsed with it. A brand built on being the original, the authentic recipe from London, had just proven it would swap the main ingredient to save money. The promise on the sign no longer matched the food in the basket. One decision, one chain reaction. The fish changed, the franchisees revolted, the money disappeared into lawsuits, the lease debt became inescapable, and the name lost its meaning. Not three separate failures, one cascade that started the day somebody decided Pollock was close enough. Long John Silver's started the same year, 1969. Captain D's also started the same year. Both survived because they never wrapped the entire brand around one premium fish. The fish chain was the only one that had promised the original and then quietly replaced it. Mrs. Paul's eventually sold what was left to Lumara Foods in Youngstown, Ohio, in March of 1982. 4 months later, Lumara filed for Chapter 11. 4 months. That is how little room was left. That is also the answer to how a chain with 826 restaurants disappears. Not a slow decline, not a cultural shift. One ingredient swap that set every other failure in motion at the same time. After bankruptcy, the chain did not vanish in one dramatic night. It disappeared the way old chains usually disappear, one location at a time. One restaurant closes and the family starts going somewhere else, the children grow up, the building becomes a bank or a cell phone store, and eventually somebody mentions the name and half the room remembers it while the other half has no idea what you are talking about. The company passed through new ownership during the 80s and 90s, the footprint kept shrinking. Then Nathan's Famous, the hot dog company, obtained rights to the brand. Nathan's had also picked up Kenny Rogers Roasters, so now a hot dog company was running the retirement home for dead restaurant chains, just collecting names that used to mean something and tucking them inside food courts. You could order a fish fillet next to a Nathan's hot dog at a Walmart and see the Arthur Treacher's name above the counter, but the fries were crinkle-cut, not the thick-ridged chips. There was no malt vinegar on the counter, no hush puppies, no lemon pies. The logo survived. The world around it did not. Here is one detail that shows what those restaurants had once been. The playwright August Wilson, the man who wrote Fences and The Piano Lesson, reportedly wrote his play Jitney while working at one of the restaurants in St. Paul, Minnesota. Think about what kind of restaurant allows that to happen. A place where somebody can take a booth, spread out their work, stay a while and write. Not a logo in the corner of a food court, a neighborhood room. By 2021, Nathan's tried to relaunch the brand as a delivery-only ghost kitchen. The menu included items called Boom Boom Shrimp and Boom Boom Fries. I am not making that up. A recipe connected to the first fish and chip shop in England, a British actor arriving on a London bus, malt vinegar introduced to a generation. And half a century later, the same name shows up on a delivery app beside Boom Boom Fries. That is not a revival, that is a brand being used as a costume. Meanwhile, the standalone locations kept disappearing. By 2010, 27 remained. By 2018, 7. By 2021, 1 in the Falls in Ohio, run by a man named Ben Vittoria. Vittoria arrived in the United States from Sicily in 1971. He started working for the chain as a manager trainee in 1977. Planning to save money for graduate school, he figured he might stay 6 months. He stayed 47 years. He became a franchisee, operated 17 locations at his peak, and then watched them close around him, one by one, until it was just the one building on State Road. He called himself the original fish fryer, and nobody had a better claim. While corporate owners came and went, Vittoria kept the fryer at the right temperature and the recipe exactly the way it was handed to him. The dining room still had the old yellow and green lantern sign out front. You could spot it from a block away. Inside, the walls were covered with photos of the real Arthur Treacher and memorabilia from the chain's peak years. Like walking into a museum that also happened to serve the best fried fish in the state. He understood that people were not driving to the falls for fried fish. Fried fish was available anywhere. They were driving there to find out whether the food in their memory had ever really existed. Inside the restaurant, a map let visitors place a pin marking where they had traveled from. Some came from other states. One person wrote that they drove 3 hours each way and said it was worth every minute. The mayor of the falls declared June 30th, 2021, Arthur Treacher's Day. For one restaurant, one town, one man who kept turning on the fryer. And the person who accidentally started the comeback was not even trying to save the brand. Real estate developer George Simon bought the old Garfield Heights property after it closed. Not the restaurant, just the land. To close the deal, Vittoria invited him to the falls for a fish dinner. Then Simon saw the room. People were photographing the building, treating it like a landmark they might never see again. He later described the place as being like a zoo. And that meal changed the deal. The value was not in the land, it was in the reaction people had when they saw the name. Simon reopened the Garfield Heights location in February of 2023. When Vittoria retired in April of 2024, Simon's group acquired the Falls restaurant. A third opened in Cleveland Heights in April of 2025. In a building that first opened as an Arthur Treacher's in February of 1971, then disappeared. Then returned to the same address more than half a century later. Not a replica, the same place. A fourth followed in Lakewood. 4 stores now, all using the original recipes and specs that Vittoria kept alive through 47 years, and a dozen corporate owners who had no idea what they were sitting on. The thick ridged chips are back, the hush puppies are back, and the fryer is turning out the same golden fillets. What they are doing is basically the in-and-out model applied to fish. Keep the menu small, keep the recipe the same, and never change it just because somebody in a boardroom thinks the market wants something different. That is the opposite of what killed the chain in the first place. One reviewer took her food back to a friend's house in Cleveland, fish and chips, chicken and chips, hush puppies, and wrote that it tasted exactly the way she remembered. Exactly, after decades. Another described the fish sandwich with the cheese sauce and a crunch pup and just wrote, "It is still that good. I will drive back in a heartbeat." And that is the thing that makes this story different from every other dead chain. People do not drive 3 hours for a logo. They drive 3 hours because somewhere in their memory there is a sound, a crunch, a taste they have not been able to find anywhere else. And they want to know if it is still real. They carry the basket to a table, peel back the tartar sauce lid, pour malt vinegar over those thick chips, pick up the fish, and take the first bite. And it cracks. Same sound, same shatter. A sound that came out of hundreds of American strip malls 50 years ago, nearly vanished, and somehow held on long enough for somebody to hear it again. So tell me, which one was yours? What town, what year, who took you there, and what was the order? Fish and chips, a crunch pup, lemon pies? Or were those hush puppies secretly carrying the entire restaurant the whole time? Put it in the comments, because the best record of what this place used to be might be sitting in the memories of the people who ate there. I will see you next week when we dig up another name that used to be everywhere.